Want to welcome you to our webinar on policy, advocacy, and strategy for supporting agritourism. My name's Lisa Chase, and I'm with University of Vermont and the Vermont Tourism Research Center. And I am so fortunate today to be joined by two serious policy wonks from different parts of the globe. We'll be hearing first from Marge Kilkelly, who is a farmer, politician, rural advocate, foodie, and policy consultant from Dresden, Maine. And she sent me a brief bio with an extensive resume that was very impressive, but I'm going to shorten it for the sake of time. She has served in both the Maine House and Senate, representing the county where she grew up. And after she served in the House and Senate for long enough that she hit term limits, she became the director of the Northeast States Association for Agricultural Stewardship, which is an organization of legislator ag leaders from Maine to Maryland, and also including the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Eastern Canada. Having gotten very good at policy at the more local levels, she moved to DC, where she was the policy director for Angus King's successful US Senate campaign. And she spent 6 years in the trenches in DC as his senior policy advisor on agriculture, of course, but also dealing with healthcare, opioids, gun policy, and nuclear waste. Then eventually, she got tired of DC and moved back to Maine, where she currently lives with her husband, Joseph Murray, and they run Dragonfly Cove Farm. And there they raise cashmere goats, pigs, and poultry. They also, being a diversified farm, they offer cooking classes and film Nourishing Maine, which is a channel devoted to Maine foods and the heritage industries that support our economy. So we're going to hear about the policy work that Marge has done and her lessons learned first. And then we're going to shift gears to Rose Wright, who is the founder and managing director of Regionality in New South Wales, Australia. Rose is a passionate and highly respected agri-food, tourism, destination management, and regional development professional with tremendous experience in facilitation and strategy. The focus of Rose's work has consistently drawn upon her qualities as a leader, strategic thinker, communicator, and also a team builder. And she has a reputation for taking big picture concepts and working with a team to get the job done. And that's what we've been seeing Rose do with her work with the Global Agritourism Network, where we are really fortunate to have Rose leading our policy and advocacy committee of the Global Agritourism Network. And Marge is right there with her as co-chair. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Global Agritourism Network, we launched the network just under 2 years ago. We launched it April 11th of 2023, and we have been growing quickly. We currently have almost 1,000 members from, I believe we're up to 101 countries now. And it is free to become a part of this network. All you have to do is visit our website. Shauna will drop a link into chat, or open up this QR code and fill out the form. And one of the choices you'll have on the form is whether you would like to join any of the Global Agritourism Network committees. And we have committees on research and education and policy, as well as several other topics. So feel free to join and let us know if you want to be part of any of these committees. Now that we've given you a little background on our amazing panelists today and the Global Agritourism Network, I would like to take some time to find out who is here in the room with us. And I'm going to launch a poll that says, describe yourself, check all the boxes that apply. And I know many of you who have joined us for these Global Agritourism Network webinars in the past are quickly getting on and filling out the poll, I can see. So we'll give folks just a minute to fill out the poll. And we know that many of you wear lots of hats. So feel free to check as many boxes as apply in your case. And we'll share the results in a moment. But once you've taken time to fill out the poll, I want to ask you if you're willing to introduce yourself in chat. And when you go into chat, I think the default would only send it to the hosts and panelists, which are Marge, Rose, myself, Shauna, and our captioner, Diane. If you want everyone to see who you are, and you don't have to, but if you choose to have everyone see who you are, please select everyone, not just hosts and panelists. And then take some time to introduce yourself into chat. I have the privilege, we can't share the registration list for confidentiality reasons, but I have the privilege of looking and seeing we had over 300 people registered. I think we were around 320 people registered for this webinar from all over the world, and so many farmers, ranchers, other kinds of producers, as well as all sorts of different professions out there. I'm now going to end the poll and share the results so you can see who is here with us today. And you can see that we are about 1/3 farmer, rancher, producer. And then let's see, next up, about 1/3 business owners, 30% are tourism professionals. And then we've got quite a mix of nonprofits, government agencies, almost 20%, 20% researchers, extension, quite a mix of people joining us today. I'm now going to stop sharing the poll results, and I'm also going to stop sharing my screen to give Marge a chance to bring up her slides. And our first presenter today is going to be Marge, and we are really hoping to have time for Q&A at the end, but Marge and Rose both have a lot of really great information to share. So at any point, feel free to go to that Q&A box that you see in the bottom of your screen and ask questions in the Q&A box, and hopefully we'll get to them verbally at the end, but we'll try to answer stuff as they come up if we can. And also chat. Chat is great for kind of the background communications. If we were, part of what I love about in-person gatherings is the networking that happens. The chit chat in the back of the room or in the hallway. Even while someone's giving a presentation. And we know that that sort of networking is an important part of the Global Agritourism Network. And it's hard to do it well during these Zoom webinars, but using chat is one way to do it. So if you're a multitasker type and you're in chat and you see someone mentioning something that's interesting to you, or even want to reflect on what Marge and Rose are saying, feel free to chime in at any time during the chat. And if you find it drives you crazy, just close your chat box and ignore it. Not everybody loves the multitasking. And with that, I see that Marge is all queued up. So Marge Kilkelly.
Thank you, Lisa. Can you hear me okay? Just making
Hear
sure.
you
All
great.
right.
Yes.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And as I've been watching the chat pop up names and where people are from, it's just so exciting to be part of this network and to be able to share just some thoughts and ideas with all of you about regulation, rules, laws, and guidelines. And as you can see from the goat up in the right-hand top corner, he's not sure it's going to be interesting, but I can tell you, you don't need to take a death nap now. We're gonna have a good time. And a lot of what I want to talk about are things that, maybe most of you already know or already do, but it might be some good reminders And for some others, it may be new information about how to approach some of these challenges that we have. My background's in community economic development, and my interest in integrating policy and agritourism really began in 1999. I was an Eisenhower Fellow in Central Europe looking at rural economic development. And I went to a EU-sponsored conference that was focused on Austria and how ag and tourism were really blended together. And it seemed almost seamless. Farms were hosting visitors, and it was just seen as an extension of the farm and a very logical thing for people to be doing. What I had seen in the US back then was that there were two industries almost circling each other, trying to figure out who owned agritourism. Was it hospitality or was it agriculture? And you know, when either critters are circling or people are circling, it's usually not a good sign. So it also seemed to me that back then, at home at least, that the ag folks I knew that were looking at agritourism really saw it as sort of this is the answer. This is going to take care of all the issues that I've got. But they were not necessarily identifying the skills and the resources that they were going to need in order for this to be successful and the infrastructure. So, they weren't always developing a realistic net benefit plan. What is it going to cost me? What do I need to do differently in order to make this thing happen? So today, what we're going to cover public policy and why it's important to agritourism, different levels of government. And I know obviously in different countries around the world, they're all different names, but there are levels of government everywhere. And then how do the people that are making policy know what I need? And then how to effectively communicate with policymakers. And then we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A. And you can see my good friend Winston headed out to the barn on a snowy morning. All right. One of the things about agritourism, it's like, are we ag or are we hospitality? Well, the answer is yes. And just like that little doe goat, it's nice to kind of be on both sides of the fence. That's the way goats live. Public policy is really siloed. The in the legislative process, the people that are writing the laws and writing the regulations have a particular task. They're an ag committee, or they're a health committee, or they're a land use committee. Um, and then as those laws or regulations are written, they end up being chaptered. So you've got a chapter of ag law, and you've got a chapter of land use law, and you've got another one for, again, health and safety that might have to do with hospitality. And the organizations that are regulating, the agencies that are regulating those laws are also siloed. So agritourism really does present a complication to that structure because we are fairly new in the grand scheme of things, and we fall into at least two separate categories, if not a lot more than that. Um, our job then is to really explain and to clarify and to work to streamline those bodies of law and regulation and educate the people that are making the law, educate the people who are enforcing the law about what's happening in our business and why these things are important. Whoop. Um, the the next level of complexity is which level of government is in fact making the rule that you're dealing with. And as I said, every place is unique. But going back to my previous slide, our job is to educate whoever is making the policy. Some of these rules will seem really onerous, some of them seem ridiculous, and then some of them are reasonable. But one of the things that I have felt for a long time is that there's an inherent urban bias in public policy. And urban speak really is about jobs, taxes, and income. And we need to, as rural people, understanding the importance of our rural economy, we need to translate what we know is going on into urban speak. So when we're talking to policymakers at any level. We need to talk about how many jobs are being created or how many people are being employed, what taxes are being generated, what income is happening, whether it's to our farm or to our region. The bottom line is that is how we are going to move these things forward because we understand the intricacies of our economy in a way that urban folks generally don't. And again, my feeling is that in most cases, that urban bias is something that really does impact us really significantly. So why is it important for me to understand what level of government is making a rule that might be slowing down my business or, stopping my business in some cases? I can't tell you how many times when I was in the state legislature, I would get calls from people complaining about a town ordinance, or I would get calls from people complaining about a federal law. And each time I'd have to say to them, I'm sorry, but there's really nothing I can do about that. And you can imagine when I was working on the Hill, I would get calls again about a state law. And it's like, I can't do anything about that. And the where you make a difference is where that particular rule or law lives. And so one of the things that I find is that, when people do call and you have to tell them that, that's really not in my wheelhouse, sometimes they get angry and I can tell you that's not really helpful. But what I know is that they're frustrated and they're going to have to spend more time figuring out who it is that they do need to contact. And none of us have that kind of time to waste. We need to be as efficient as possible. And so doing your homework ahead of time and figuring out where that issue is or where something could be improved is important. The other piece that I don't think we realize enough is that sometimes laws are really helpful. So, for example, in the state of Maine, this is a sign that's on the door of our barn that basically says there's an inherent risk of coming onto a farm. And unless we, as the farmers, are doing something negligent or cause harm for people, then the people that are visiting share in that responsibility. And that's a law that I particularly appreciate. So one of the questions that we really need to look at is, how do those people that are making all these rules and laws, how do they know what I need? Well, I can tell you they're not going to know anything unless you tell them. Elected people bring into office their own knowledge and skills. And as I put here, just in the little teeny tiny state of Maine with 1.3 million people, there are on average 3,000 pieces of legislation every 2 years. In that 3,000 pieces of legislation, you are going to have every issue imaginable. And again, people bring their own experience of that. I remember one of the debates that I will never forget has to do with longitudinal ruts on highways and how the weight of a truck impacts that. Now, I can tell you, I knew nothing about that issue, and I really depended on people in the legislature that had the information to explain why a particular law was going to be important to that. And it's up to us again to do that education piece because we are the ones that have the expertise in our issues. And so, as I said, Maine gets 3,000 pieces of legislation. In Congress, as you can well imagine, or in any federal legislating body, it's everything from roads to bridges and foreign aid and again, nuclear waste. But we have to take responsibility to provide policymakers with solid facts to inform their decisions. I did a piece for another group and I said, if lawmaking is like sausage making, make it good. I mean, that's really what we want to be doing. So how do you educate others about the importance of agritourism? Well, the first thing is you have to know your own story. And when it says, why am I doing this? There are days when that question will be your mantra. And the bottom picture is the day that I was working on the computer, sending out confirmations for a cooking class, and a gust of wind happened to come up and blow over that particular tree, which took out the power and the communication line. And there are days like that, and you just go, why am I doing this? Um, but it is important to know your story and to be able to tell it and to tell it in a way that people really understand. So it might be, as the case in Maine, we've got a place that wonderful dairy farm. They've been a dairy farm for years, and now they're selling ice cream, and it's helping to, support the different parts of the family. Is this a new venture that you're doing? What experience do you or your team bring to it? Is there experience in your family or something else that is going on? What's the benefit? What is the benefit? Is the benefit to your community? Maybe it's for yourself, exposure to your products is going to bring you more customers, but maybe the business will add to your community by creating a new destination experience for visitors, which is really important as well, and something that policymakers like to learn about because they like learning about how much money is this going to bring in to my state and how many tax dollars is it going to bring in. Effective communication with policymakers, it's all about relationships. In real estate, they say it's location, location, location. Well, in policy, it's relationship, relationship, relationship. It's first of all important to identify the people who represent you at every level. If you can, reach out to them before you've got a problem, and get to know their staff if they have staff. Some local people have staff, sometimes it's congressional staff. I can tell you, as a congressional staff person, I was the one that took in all the information and synthesized it and gave it to the boss so that we could make decisions. Um, be ready to tell your story. Offer to provide your on the ground insight on the issue. Again, if you're being faced with thousands of pieces of legislation, it's really nice to have this list of people who are there and ready to help on a particular issue. So being a resource is critically important. Someday you will get a call and one of those offices will reach out to you and say, hey, we've got this new idea. What do you think? That's when you know you're in. That's when you know you are part of the decision making and you are being respected for the knowledge and insights that you are bringing into that issue. The other thing is, whenever you can, say thank you. I can't tell you how few times people say thank you to people who are elected. Just saying. So now that you've got your story and you've reached out to folks, telling your story is wonderful, but showing your story is even better. The best way to communicate is to show folks what you're doing. Have an open house on your farm, on your business. Bring in local policymakers or your regional, state, whatever, or even your federal staff. Show them what you do. If you're going to have a particular program, you might even do a mini version of that program and let them know what the experience is that people are going to have when they come to your place of business. Um, the other thing that's really important on this one is when you're inviting people to come, let's say you've got an issue that you know is going to be coming up. There's a barrier to you selling more milk, for example. Make sure that that's part of your tour so that when that piece of legislation comes up later, you can say, well, do you remember that day you were on the farm and I showed you I had this milk room and blah, blah, blah. And this bill would help me expand it so that I can, sell more milk, whatever. But just think about how you can integrate any issues that you're dealing with into that process. The other thing about effective communication with policymakers, whether you're making a phone call or an email or visiting in person or testifying, try not to weigh in at the last minute. Um, it, Obviously, there are going to be days when you're going to pick up the newspaper and go, oh my God, I didn't know they were doing that. And so, you're gonna have to deal with it at the last minute. But the more you can stay on top of things, the better, so that you're not trying to change a tsunami of a decision all at once, because that is really a challenge. Make sure that, and these are simple things. Again, it's about relationship. Make sure you remind them of who you are, that, maybe they came to your farm for a visit or you saw them in an event. Um, Identify the issue that you're speaking about as specifically as you can. So go back to 3,000 pieces of legislation. There might be 5, 7, 10 pieces of legislation on land use. If you say, I'm just really concerned about the bill on land use, it's like, which one? So most things that are being proposed have got some kind of number on them or some kind of identifying factor. Make sure you know what that is. Then explain why you support something or why you oppose it. I support this because if this passes, it will allow me to XYZ. Or I oppose it because it will stop me from doing XYZ. Um, Offer any additional information or to provide any additional information if they've got questions. Be respectful and listen, especially when the person has a different opinion. If they say, well, we really can't support that because, and maybe then you could be offering some alternative, something in the middle ground, maybe something that's not going to be perfect for you, but won't be as bad. Or maybe it'll be not perfect for you, not as good as what you want, but it might work for a while. The other thing, and it's kind of in the middle, but ought to be at the end, never say, vote yes, vote no on something and just let it go at that, because it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't tell the policymaker why they should take a position. And that's a really critical piece. You want somebody to get up on the floor of wherever they are and be able to say, I talked to Jane so and so, and here was one of the concerns that she had, and that's the reason that I can or can't support this particular issue. Um, just saying no doesn't really get you where you need to be. Agritourism, I believe, is really an essential aspect of agriculture. Obviously, it provides an opportunity for diversifying income, and it does increase opportunities for rural development, but it also is critical when it comes to educating the public and policymakers about the value and complexity of ag production. In the United States, we're less than 2% of the population. Most people are 5 generations away from growing their own food. And as I've said before, they don't even have an oral history anymore. They don't know how food happens. They go to the seasonless supermarket where pumpkins and strawberries sit next to each other and just assume that, of course, pumpkins and strawberries must grow at the same time because there they are. How could that not happen? Or they might see a news show that says, oh, the orange crop is being devastated. This is terrible. And the next day they go to the store and oranges are on sale. We have to do what we can to educate the public and educate policymakers about the importance and about how things really happen. Wherever you are, I just believe that what we're doing is really critical to the absolute future of agriculture. And I just want to say thank you so much for what you're doing, and let's just keep moving this process forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marge. Great to have your perspective, thinking about things globally, but also your background in Maine. We're now going to move all the way across the globe to New South Wales, Australia, and hear about Rose's experience there.
Lovely. So, hello everybody. Marge, that was fantastic and really set up a great um, scene setting for what I'm going to show you, which is a very practical application of all the things you've been talking about and how we changed legislation in New South Wales and are continuing to do so. I'll just grab my get my presentation up. I'll do a screen share. Here we go. Share, put that up for, just put that into the right setting. Sorry, I just moved a few things around on my screen. Here we go. Okay. My name's Rose. I am chair of the Policy and Advocacy Committee. I've been working here in Australia. There's a couple of farmers who I've been working with for nearly 20 years. Call me the grandmother of agritourism in Australia, and I'm a little bit perturbed by that term, but that's okay. It's all good. What I want to talk to you about is really the same things that Marge has been talking about, but how we've used those in Australia to use that process and how we went about it over a very long period of time. Policy and advocacy is not a quick fix. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of commitment, and it takes a lot of bringing people on the journey with you. And in my mind, it also takes a lot of evidence to prove that what we are saying is actually a thing. And a key thing here is about translating what you're trying to say into a language that the people you're wanting to communicate with understand. So translating your message to an appropriate language for the policymaker or for the sector that you're talking to is also really important. So what I'm going to cover off on today is, and I've got a little video at the end just to keep things light, role of advocacy in policy and regulatory reform, systemic change that enables growth in agritourism supply. Really important to actually develop clusters and, viable groupings of farms who are open to visitors in regions and communities. So it's actually worth their while and there's enough to attract visitors to that area for that activity. And how policy isn't just about changing rules and regulations. It's also about making sure that strategy and then investment in capacity building, developing regional clusters to develop and support positive change in the farming community is a really important thing. And I've got a case study at the end to kind of talk about that. The case study we're going to talk about is New South Wales, which is really the first state to have done in a holistic way land use planning changes, which has been a major impediment in this country and still is in most states. So they've changed it, and it's actually had a national impact because everybody's looking at it. And then the final thing is be careful what you wish for. Some of the things you need to be careful around in terms of how you go about this, and particularly for tourism professionals, how you advocate and why you advocate for agritourism, and then how you market it and communicate it. So there's a few consequences, unintended consequences from going ahead and marketing something or going ahead and advocating for holistic change without understanding the impact it may have on agriculture and food sovereignty and food security. So it's a heavy topic, but honestly, it is one of the most important things that we need to do. Once this work is done, it doesn't mean it's over. It's a constant checking and rechecking and keeping up with contemporary needs and issues that the agricultural sector and regional communities have. Okay, why is this not going forward? Press the right button. Okay, sorry if I talk to myself occasionally. Okay, why was reform required? So we had, when I first started in this in 2006, I was working in it a little bit earlier, but in earnest in 2006, it was my focus. And we looked at the opportunities for connecting agriculture and tourism, food and wine, all those great gastronomic tourism, everything that we love. And that's what tourism loves, of course. We love to be able to sit in a beautiful paddock under a cherry tree or in a vineyard or whatever it happens to be, sipping something, eating something amazing and going, how good's life? But there's a lot of stuff that has to happen for that to occur. And there are a lot of consequences that the farming sector are worried about in order to make that happen. So there's been a lot of barriers to making that happen, both from an agricultural sector, but also from a policy planning sector. So we in tourism loved the idea, but we've got to make it work for the core sector, which is agriculture. So some people in in this farming sector recognise the opportunity that agritourism could present, and it adds an opportunity for value adding and diversification, that pathway to market to sell product, create your own value chain, which is great. But in most cases, land use planning presented significant barriers and costs, so it meant really hard for farmers to get in. Complex policy, planning legislation, and other regulation creates very complex barriers, so it's just too hard. So most working family farms just either did it, and let me say still do it illegally, which is not good, or they just didn't bother. So it was just really a difficult thing. So without these fit for purpose agritourism planning frameworks, which in most states are in most parts of Australia are dictated by the state and then handed down to local government. So in Australia, we have three tiers of government. Got the federal government, which is a Commonwealth. You've then got the state jurisdictions, states and territories. The states set out their own planning legislation, and it's different in every state. And then you've got local government. And in the main, local government has to implement the state-based planning legislation. So the state gives the framework to local government. There presents a problem because, the centre of Sydney has no idea how that implements on the ground in the region. So, and you've got to understand that the protection of agricultural land in Australia is really critical. Where we have some of the most degraded soils on the planet, we're losing topsoil at a rate of knots, and around the world, losing topsoil and food production is a major issue. So protecting ag land for future generations is actually the purpose of the legislation. And so that's why it's really important that everything hangs off that and we understand that. So that's the background and setting. The next thing to think about was the context in New South Wales. I'm sorry if this is a bit hard to read for some of you. Excuse me. So 2006, I was working for the Sustainable Tourism CRC, which was a network of 16 universities around the country. And we basically, I was handed a whole heap of research and they said, this isn't working. Farmers aren't using this. Why not? And so we crafted the country's first agritourism business development program. And that was designed to be a catalyst for, developing local food culture. We piloted in northern New South Wales, and that really gave us a benchmark of evidence of why wasn't this happening. It wasn't just about farmers not picking up the manuals that we were producing. There were a whole range of factors around capacity building, understanding that was an opportunity for them. But one of the biggest impediments was actually policy and legislation that made it really costly and difficult for this sector to actually get a start, let alone a foothold. So for most farmers who are doing agritourism, and I'll shout out to Tim, who's in Tasmania, who runs Coringa Farm, they run it as a rural tourism facility. They would have gone in and done a development application, but it was very tourism focused, yeah? So if a farmer wants to do something that's small scale and innovative and, seasonal, almost impossible, just not cost effective by the time you pay the tens of thousands of dollars of fees and DAs to development application fees to get through under a planning scheme that actually doesn't even make sense for a farm. It's designed for a golf course in a rural area. So that was kind of how it was. I think we ended up with, there were 39 different possible different planning definitions that you could use, none of which were actually appropriate for most of the activities that farmers wanted to do. We started the Advocacy for Land Use Policy Reform in 2007, right? So I just want you to note, in 2022, on December 1st, was when the New South Wales government passed legislative change. So I just want you to look at that time frame. So 2006, we started building evidence. 2007, we started our policy and advocacy journey. And in 2022, we finally got something through. So it's not a quick fix, but with our experience, now you can actually fast track that by taking the right path. And now agritourism is actually a thing. So whereas I had to really try and describe what it was back then. So it was a catalyst for research, policy and advocacy, and we needed to identify, how do we make this happen? And the way we did it was actually to, like Marge, we brought ministers. We brought the Minister for Agriculture to that group the federal minister, to that group in northern New South Wales, and we got the farmers to tell him why this was such an important opportunity for them, how hard it was, and what it could do in terms of being a catalyst for economic development, more resilient farms, diversification, and creating new jobs. And we also talked about, the broader impact on community economic development and how it would really help create a vibrant food culture, et cetera, et cetera. And look, truly from 2006 to now, the Northern Rivers of New South Wales is such a vibrant food and farming region, and agritourism region. It's amazing the change that's occurred, and that was a catalyst for it. Um, the advocacy. So I'm going to leap forward. We had a change of government in 2010. We got a whole range of reform that went through in 2010 and 2011, or 2010 in the previous government, where the minister had come up, which was amazing. And, we actually had funding for agritourism. We actually had federal funding program for farmers to do agritourism. New government came in, dropped everything. That's okay. So then we had to start again. It's life. I actually changed focus to the state government because we had an opportunity to work with the New South Wales Small Business Commissioner. They approached us. They said, look, we've been having approaches from people saying that there is a problem with regulation. Their job was to try and bust regulation for small business, and most farms fall into that in this country. And so we helped them design a pilot that would actually test. We identified all the barriers, helped them design a test pilot that would gather evidence to be able to then look at what regulatory reform needed to occur and how we needed to change that. And that process started in 2017, and we worked through that process, and eventually through a long period of time and lots of consultation, but evidence-based policy reform, we ended up changing the regulation, and then it's been tweaked ever since. That the key to that was this cross-sector engagement and consultation. So the Small Business Commissioner's team was amazing, and we worked with them like another team member, and they were incredible. And we were able to work together to bring together all the right stakeholders. So the New South Wales Farmers Association, the Department of Primary Industry, Tourism, Destination New South Wales, the state tourism body, and everybody in between, who might have an opinion on whether or not this legislation could go through. They were part of an internal working group that we were part of, and we were able to address all the issues or do the investigation and tweak the legislation so that it did ensure that biosecurity was okay, that we did have enough buffer zones so that farmers who were doing activities that might be odorous or, might have noise, there were buffer zones in place to protect farmers who weren't doing agritourism from farmers next door who were, and also to protect consumers, things like roads and all the rest of it. So that we really looked at it quite forensically, and we designed the framework for the legislation, and then they turned it into, you know, legal speak and government policy speak. So we came up with the numbers and what worked, and what would actually be viable. And we designed a policy that was designed to start small, test and trial with very limited, no real DA or no real approvals required. As long as you tick some boxes, you could, and it was all about, a few factors which I'll talk about, and then you could scale up to a full development application, but within a framework of agritourism definitions that were fit for purpose, and you could actually use them on your farm. So I'll just go to the next slide. Wasn't an overnight success. It took a lot of time. So that's kind of what we did. I won't spend too much time, but the pilot was really interesting because that gave us the evidence base. So there were 3 regions. We ran a business development program with 35 farms across those 3 local government areas. We then followed those farmers and journey mapped them with the department and their researchers through the planning process so we could identify where the barriers were. And then we used that data and information to work on legislative reform plus other consultation. And then since then, the state tourism organisations got on board and developed, a policy. And then one of those groups has formed this incredible cluster, which is one of the case studies I'm going to talk to you about. But, a farmer could have, we had 2 farmers in that case study in one region. So they're both in the same local government area. One was a 55,000 acre sheep, cattle and cropping property. And the other was a 7-acre or 5-acre lavender farm on the outskirts of one of the rural villages. The small farm, when we went through the DA for them, the planner that was with us at the time from Sydney, which is the capital, said that it was actually harder for this small lavender farm to open an on-farm distillery and a retail space on their farm than to get a multi-story mixed-use building in George Street, which is the main street essentially of Sydney, through Sydney City Council. And that's because of the absence of appropriate planning frameworks and definitions to make it easy for them to do it. And everything is open to interpretation, which makes it very hard. So it was more costly and more difficult and frustrating. In Australia, it takes years to get a development application through prior to these. So what I want you to think about is, there are a few things that we did and a few things to think about, in developing the New South Wales legislation, but also in, general policy, strategy, and advocacy. So again, bring together those key stakeholders across agriculture and tourism sectors, as well as legislators, policymakers to clearly define what agritourism is and isn't. It's really important to understand, especially the policy around agricultural land. And why is that legislation in place? Why are there restrictions? Why can't you just do anything? And that is, in most countries, ag land is a premium. Ag land is really an incredible resource, and we need to protect it for future generations. And like I said earlier, when you delve into the legislation, that is the purpose of the legislation. So planners have to actually comply with that by law. So what we have to do, if we're trying to advocate for agritourism, we've got to make sure that everything we do supports the protection of agricultural land and to make sure that it doesn't compromise farming. So if you've got a Wally World farm that is not real farmers, sitting on a 50 acres of land, they come in from the city, they go, this place is great, Rick, we could run a business here. We could kind of have some show cows over there. We could have a few chooks running around the place. We can have 1,000 people a day on the farm. We could do all these things. But the farmer next door is trying to farm something that they might start at 3 a.m. because they need to get up before the sun rises, or they go down. So having the Wally World farm next door, which is a nondescript generic way of saying Disneyland, a Disneyland farm that isn't a real farm, it's a showcase farm. It's a facade. You might as well be going to Movie World. It's not real. It's all a ruse. Having a farm next door that operates in that way compromises the productive capacity of the real farmers around them. And that has a trickle-down effect on everybody. But it also means that the price of land goes up, so farmers can't buy the land, and it changes the purpose. So that is why it's really critical that you understand from a farming perspective, how can we make agritourism ancillary to farming activity in the district so it doesn't compromise the farming activity? Because if you take away farming, all you're left with is the Knott's Berry Farm in LA. Was Berry Farm, not anymore, just a tourist park. So I think it's really important that you understand that and you actually truly protect that farming land. Our land use planning is designed to support agricultural production and to be a pathway to market. And that secondary to agricultural activity is a really important thing. The other thing that and I mentioned this earlier, the other things that we put in place, which I was like a dog with a bone, was to ensure that we have this tiered approval system. So you could go in, and if you were small scale, infrequent, or over a short period of time, and you could demonstrate that it was ancillary to your farming activity, and then you were ticking all these other boxes like access and, toilet facilities and other things that you could have on site for that time. You could actually do that if you were able to do that now under the current legislation without a development application. Nothing. You could tick a box, comply with that, and don't need a DA. And that was designed so that we could test and trial what is happening with the legislation. And if you loved agritourism and it was working for you, you could then put in a development application. So that was how we did that. So the legislation is designed to allow farmers to dip their toe in the water and make sure it works for them, and then refine it and go the next level if they want, or just do it seasonally if that's what they want to. Defining agritourism in the planning scheme is critical, and I'm really an advocate for this, and this is to the Australian people out there. Undermining the definition of agritourism starts to undermine the confidence of planners to support it, because it starts to become something other than that. In my view, agritourism is a tourism-related experience or product that connects agricultural products, people, or places with visitors on a farm. It's not a farmer's market in town. It's not a rural show. It's not a golf course. on a piece of rural land that was once a farm. That is rural tourism, and I think those two things need to be very separate. You can see the definitions under there, and I think these slides are going to be available, so you can have a look at those later, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because of our webinar time, but there's lots to cover here. It's really important from our perspective that it is secondary to agriculture and factors that have influenced momentum. I can't stress enough how important it is to have critical data sources to back up strategy and policy reform. The big change for us was in 2017 when the Commonwealth Science Organisation, CSIRO, Science and Research Organisation, did this groundbreaking research. They do these annual things. For the first time, they identified agritourism as one of the emerging industry sectors, and then went ahead to say that its potential is the opportunity is that it could be worth $18.6 billion by 2030 and direct injection $5.6 billion. That piece of information was a game changer, and we use that like you have no idea, and we're still trotting that out. But that is the thing that made policymakers sit up and listen. Investment, jobs, economy, it's the economy, stupid. So you need to be able to have some background research on a local level or a national level to actually identify what it's going to be worth. Key learnings, we need systemic change, strategic intervention, research, advocacy. Find a champion within government. My God, the Small Business Commissioner, Robin Hobbs, angel put on this earth. She was the game changer for us. We were actually able to make that happen. She listened and she put resources behind it, and we worked hand in glove to make that happen. Speak their language. That's the other thing. Supply side development. So it's not just about policy. You actually need to develop programs, invest in strategy, invest in capacity building, and clusters are really important. Be careful what you wish for. I want to show you a video at the end that I've got not long. You really need to let agriculture lead this, because if tourism drags them along, that's when things go wrong. So I think it's important that we really consider that protecting the primacy of agriculture and agricultural production has to be first and foremost, not just marketing. And don't oversell and underdeliver. Don't do that. I'll quickly talk to you about the Plains. Amazing community, one of our regions. Agritourism, in fact, tourism wasn't a thing there. They are now one of the amazing groups of people who are building on huge farms, 55,000 acre farms, converting huge wool sheds into event spaces, investing millions of dollars out there. It's gone from no agritourism activity to this real focus, and the best way for me to show you is for them to tell their story. I'll just go to their video. Can you hear it?
The Liverpool Plains is incredibly special because it's a really unspoilt part of Australia. It's a beautiful part of Australia. It's iconic agricultural part of Australia.
This is the promised land. It's fertile. It's central to most of the markets. It's biologically diverse. It's the food bowl of New South Wales.
I love the vastness of the landscape, the quietness, the stillness. It can be so quiet and still, but it can also be buzzing. It can be quite a busy place.
It's just so beautiful. You can be out on the plains just looking at the vastness, or you can be in sort of Willow Tree, Wollabadar area where you've got the beautiful hills. You can jump in your car and just see such spectacular diversity.
We just enjoy a different scenery every season here. The landscape is so colourful. The plains growing all the crops, and then you're here with the beautiful hills and the wildlife.
Yeah, we produce food, we produce fibre, and that food meats, grains, oilseeds, you name it.
One of the things about the Liverpool Plains is its ability to produce food and fibre year-round, which is really unique in Australian agriculture. And through that, there's just a beautiful abundance of colours, which visitors love.
When we get artists, invite artists to come here and teach, you don't have to ask them a second time because they just want to keep coming back because there's a painting everywhere.
I think this region's really special, and the Plains are special because it is the most amazing agricultural powerhouse region. So we have amazing water underneath these amazingly deep soils. There's a story that you can plant a needle and it will grow into a crowbar in the soils. They're so rich on the Liverpool Plains.
The Plains in general, again, I think it's the historic significance. It's a strong community. It's a building community.
The people reflect the landscape. They too, the people in our area, are full of colour and warmth and generosity and are so hospitable. And we all just have each other's back.
Then for many people it's a real surprise when they actually happen to come here and see what it's like, because it is so amazingly beautiful. It does have so many different enterprises, so many different people, so many different little communities. You can find nearly everything in terms of agriculture. We have people who make amazing produce from that as well, so a lot of home industries.
As far as a destination, you can come and do lots of different things. We've got the accommodation so they can stay overnight or a couple of nights and then head out to meet all the other lovely people here in the Liverpool Plains.
Well, that's it, folks. Thanks very much. I really appreciate you listening to me. And I'll hand over to you, Lisa.
All right. Thank you so much, Rose and Marge. It was so great to hear a little bit about policy, talk a little bit more about policy. In closing, I also want to thank, along with Rose and Marge, all of you for joining us today. I'm sorry we didn't have time for questions, but Shauna is going to follow up with an email probably next week that will have a recording of this webinar, as well as some information on Rose and Marge and on the Global Agritourism Network Policy Committee. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about what's going on there and work with Rose and Marge on developing agritourism policy and advocacy that is local, regional, and also at national and global levels. We do have more webinars in the queue and committee meetings as well. So here's another QR code for you, just in case you would like to see more information, and we're constantly updating this calendar. And then finally, we want to ask you to please take a short survey about the webinar today. We really appreciate your feedback on what's working well for you, what else you would like to see in webinars. And one of the questions is, if you have a webinar idea that you'd like to share, let us know in that survey. But if there's other topics, other people that you would recommend, please let us know. And let's see, Shauna's going to drop that link into chat, and I will end my slideshow, stop sharing. And in closing, I just want to thank all of you for being here with us, and let's stay in touch. We'll follow up by email and keep the communications going.